The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete parade grounds of Fort Braxton Military Academy as three cadets lounged near the mess hall entrance. Marcus Thompson, a tall blonde with shoulders that filled out his uniform perfectly, leaned against the brick wall with the casual confidence of someone who had never been challenged. Beside him, James Rodriguez adjusted his perfectly pressed collar while scanning the courtyard for entertainment. The third member of their group, Tyler Brooks, stood slightly apart, his dark eyes constantly moving as if calculating his next move. These three had ruled their corner of the academy for the better part of 2 years. Marcus came from a family of Air Force generals. James boasted about his father's Navy career at every opportunity. And Tyler had somehow convinced everyone that his connections could make or break a military career. Together, they had created an atmosphere where newer cadets either fell in line or found themselves the target of increasingly creative harassment. The academy buzzed with its usual morning energy. Cadets hurried between buildings, their polished boots clicking against the pavement in rhythm. The smell of coffee and bacon drifted from the mess hall, mixing with the crisp autumn air that carried the distant sound of drill instructors shouting commands at the freshman class. Marcus checked his watch and smirked. New transfer students should be arriving any minute now. Intel says it's another girl trying to prove she belongs here. He emphasized the word girl with obvious disdain, drawing chuckles from his companions. James straightened his already perfect posture. What's that make it now? Fourth female transfer this year? They never last more than a semester once they realize what real military training involves. Tyler's expression remained neutral, but his fingers drummed against his thigh in a pattern that suggested he was already planning something. This one's different, though. Heard she's older than the typical transfer. Maybe 26 or 27. Probably some college graduate who watched too many movies and thinks she can handle military life. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a black sedan at the main gate. Through the chain-link fence, they could see the vehicle pause at the security checkpoint before proceeding toward the administration building. Marcus pushed himself off the wall and gestured for his friends to follow. Showtime, gentlemen. Let's go welcome our newest classmate to Fort Braxton. They positioned themselves along the main walkway that connected the parking area to the dormitories, a route every new student had to take. The spot offered perfect visibility while appearing casual enough to avoid attracting attention from the faculty offices overhead. The sedan stopped in front of the administration building, and a woman stepped out of the passenger side. Even from a distance, the three cadets could see she was different from their usual targets. She moved with a purposeful stride that spoke of someone comfortable with her surroundings. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried herself with a straight-backed posture that seemed natural rather than forced. Sarah Chen thanked the driver and shouldered her single duffel bag with an ease that would have impressed anyone paying attention. She had arrived at Fort Braxton with minimal fanfare, exactly as she preferred. After 8 years in the Navy SEALs, including 3 combat deployments and countless classified missions, the idea of attending a military academy felt almost quaint. The decision to pursue a formal military education had not been easy. Sarah had earned her reputation through action, not classroom theory. She had led teams through hostile territory, made split-second decisions that saved lives, and earned the respect of some of the military's most elite units. But a severe training injury had ended her active SEAL career, and the Navy had offered her a choice: accept a medical discharge or transition into an officer training program that would allow her to serve in a different capacity. Sarah chose to serve. The academy represented a new chapter, a chance to contribute her knowledge and experience to the next generation of military leaders. She had no illusions about the challenges ahead. At 27, she would be older than most of her classmates. As a woman in a traditionally male environment, she expected to face skepticism and testing. What she did not expect was to find 3 cadets blocking her path with expressions that immediately reminded her of every entitled recruit she had ever encountered. Marcus stepped forward first, his smile too wide to be genuine. "Well, well, you must be our new transfer student. Welcome to Fort Braxton, sweetheart. I'm Marcus Thompson, and these are my associates, James and Tyler." He gestured grandly, as if introducing royalty. Sarah's expression remained neutral as she shifted her duffel bag to her other shoulder. Years of dealing with hostile contacts in foreign territories had taught her to read situations quickly. These three radiated the particular brand of arrogance she had encountered in untested soldiers who mistook privilege for competence. "Thank you," she said simply, moving to step around them. James moved to block her path, his movement smooth but obvious. "Not so fast there, recruit. See, we've got a little tradition here for new arrivals, especially the special cases like yourself." His tone carried just enough emphasis to make his meaning clear. Tyler remained silent but positioned himself to Sarah's left, completing what was obviously a practiced formation. They had done this before, probably many times. Sarah recognized the tactical positioning even as she noted the complete lack of actual threat these three represented. "I'm not a recruit," Sarah said calmly. "I'm a transfer student, same as any other. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an appointment with the commandant." Marcus laughed, a sound with sharp edges. "Oh, she's got attitude. I like that. But here's the thing, princess. Everyone who comes through this academy earns their place. Some of us have been here for years, working our way up, learning what it really means to serve. We've seen plenty of transfers come and go, especially the ones who think they can skip the hard parts." Sarah studied Marcus with the same calm attention she had once reserved for potential threats in combat zones. She noted the expensive watch beneath his uniform cuff, the way his fingernails were perfectly manicured, the subtle tells that suggested someone who had never faced genuine hardship. Everything about him screamed privilege and assumption. "And what exactly do you think the hard parts are?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. James stepped closer, close enough that his intention to intimidate was unmistakable. "Physical training that'll leave you crying for your mommy. Academic pressure that breaks most people by midterms. Leadership challenges that separate the real officers from the pretenders. This isn't some college ROTC program where they hand out participation trophies." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "That does sound challenging. I imagine it requires real mental toughness, the ability to function under pressure, maybe some experience with actual leadership responsibilities." Tyler finally spoke, his voice carrying a calculating quality that suggested he considered himself the smart one of the group. "Exactly. See, most people come here thinking they know what military service means. They've watched movies, maybe done some research online. But this is the real deal. This is where boys become men, and where most girls realize they're in over their heads." The casual sexism in his comment would have been insulting if Sarah had not encountered it countless times before. She had operated in environments where being underestimated was often an advantage, where assumptions about her capabilities had allowed her to accomplish missions that might have been impossible otherwise. "Interesting perspective," she said. "And you three have all completed this challenging program?" Marcus's chest swelled with pride. "We're in our final year. Top 10% of our class. We've been through everything this place can throw at us and come out stronger. We know what it takes to succeed here, which is why we make it our business to help newcomers understand the reality of their situation." Sarah glanced around the courtyard, noting the other cadets who were carefully avoiding eye contact while clearly listening to the conversation. She recognized the dynamic immediately. These three had created an environment of intimidation that went unchallenged because everyone was either afraid of becoming a target or had convinced themselves it was somehow beneficial. "That's very generous of you," Sarah said. "I'm sure your guidance has been valuable to previous transfer students." James misread her tone completely, interpreting her words as submission rather than the careful assessment they actually represented. "Smart girl. Most people fight it at first, but they eventually realize we're doing them a favor. Better to learn the truth now than wash out after wasting everyone's time." Tyler pulled out his phone and made a show of checking the time. "Speaking of time, you mentioned an appointment with the commandant. Colonel Harrison is a stickler for punctuality. Wouldn't want you to make a bad first impression by showing up late. Of course, if you were to ask nicely, we might be willing to escort you. Make sure you don't get lost on the way." The offer was clearly designed to establish dominance, to force Sarah into a position of requesting their assistance and acknowledging their superior status. It was such a textbook power play that Sarah almost admired its simplicity. "That's very thoughtful," she said. but I think I can manage to find my way. The layout seems fairly straightforward. Marcus's smile faltered slightly. Are you sure about that? This place can be pretty confusing for newcomers. Easy to end up in the wrong building, miss important briefings, fall behind before you even get started. We'd hate to see that happen to someone who seems so confident. Sarah recognized the shift in tone, the subtle threat hidden beneath false concern. In her SEAL training, she had encountered instructors who used similar psychological tactics to test mental resilience. The difference was that those instructors had earned their authority through proven competence and were genuinely trying to prepare students for life or death situations. I appreciate your concern, she said, but I've managed to navigate more complex environments than this. I'm sure I'll be fine. James laughed, but the sound carried a harder edge now. More complex environments? Like what? A shopping mall? Lady, this is a military academy, not some civilian college campus. Everything here is designed to break down your assumptions and rebuild you into something useful. Most people need guidance to survive that process. Sarah's expression remained perfectly calm, but something in her eyes shifted. It was subtle, the kind of change that would have been recognized immediately by anyone who had served in combat. Tyler, despite his calculating nature, missed it entirely. You seem to have a lot of opinions about what I can and can't handle, Sarah observed. That's interesting, considering you know nothing about my background or qualifications. Marcus stepped closer again, his size advantage obvious and deliberate. Your background? Let me guess. College degree, maybe some volunteer work, a few leadership workshops. Am I close? Because that's what most transfers bring to the table. Academic theory with no real-world application. Sarah tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words carefully. No, that's not quite right. But I can understand why you might make those assumptions. People often project their own experiences onto others. Tyler's eyes narrowed. Something in her tone suggested she was not responding the way previous targets had. Most new students either became defensive and aggressive, making them easy to provoke further, or collapsed into submission, acknowledging the group's dominance. Sarah was doing neither. So enlighten us, Tyler said. What exactly is your background that makes you so confident about handling military training? Sarah glanced around the courtyard again, noting that their conversation had drawn more attention. Several other cadets had slowed their pace, clearly hoping to witness whatever was about to happen. She recognized the moment for what it was, a test that would establish her position in the academy's social hierarchy. I'd rather not get into specifics, she said. I'm here to focus on my education, not to compare resumes. James moved even closer, close enough that his intention to intimidate through physical proximity was unmistakable. That sounds like evasion to me. Most people who've actually accomplished something are proud to talk about it. Unless, of course, there's not much to discuss. Sarah remained perfectly still, her posture relaxed, but somehow suggesting readiness. Anyone with combat experience would have recognized the signs, but these three had never encountered someone who represented actual danger. You're right, she said quietly. People who've accomplished meaningful things are usually proud of their work. They also understand that real achievement doesn't need constant advertisement. Marcus's face reddened slightly. Are you suggesting we're all talk and no substance? Because I can tell you right now, that's not a mistake you want to make. We didn't get to the top of this academy by accident. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. I'm sure you've worked very hard to reach your current position. That kind of dedication is admirable. Her words were perfectly respectful, but somehow they felt like an insult. Tyler realized that she was managing to make them look foolish without saying anything overtly challenging. It was a skill that suggested experience in handling confrontation, which contradicted their assumptions about her background. You know what? James said, his voice carrying a harder edge. I think our new friend here needs a practical demonstration of what Fort Braxton is really about. Maybe a little orientation exercise to help her understand the standards we maintain here. Sarah's expression remained calm, but her stance shifted almost imperceptibly. Years of training had made such adjustments automatic. She was not looking for confrontation, but she was ready for whatever these three might attempt. What kind of orientation did you have in mind? She asked. Tyler's smile took on a calculating quality as he gestured toward the physical training area, visible beyond the main courtyard. Well, since you seem so confident about handling complex environments, maybe we should see how you perform under some actual pressure. The obstacle course, for instance. It's a great way to separate the talkers from the doers. Sarah followed his gaze to the training area, where she could see various physical challenges laid out across several acres. Rope climbs, wall traversals, mud pits, and other standard military training obstacles stretched into the distance. It was the kind of setup she had encountered at dozens of military facilities, though considerably less challenging than what she remembered from SEAL training. "That sounds reasonable," she said, "though I should mention that I have an appointment with Colonel Harrison in 30 minutes. Marcus waved dismissively. "This won't take long. Most people figure out their limitations pretty quickly once they get started. Besides, the Colonel appreciates initiative. He'll be impressed that you took the time to get familiar with Academy standards before your meeting." James pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. "I'm letting some of the other cadets know about our little demonstration. They always enjoy seeing how new arrivals measure up. Academic knowledge is one thing, but physical capability is what really matters in military service." Sarah noticed several cadets already moving toward the training area, their expressions suggesting they were expecting entertainment rather than education. She recognized the dynamic immediately. These three had turned hazing into a spectator sport, using public humiliation to maintain their position in the Academy's social hierarchy. "I'm curious," Sarah said, as they walked toward the obstacle course. "How many transfer students have you provided this orientation service for?" Tyler's grin widened. "Oh, we're very thorough about welcoming new arrivals. Just last month we helped a guy from West Point understand why his previous training hadn't properly prepared him for Fort Braxton standards. Took him about 15 minutes on the rope climb before he realized he needed to adjust his attitude." Marcus laughed at the memory. "Poor guy was so winded he could barely speak, but he thanked us afterward for helping him understand what real training looks like. Sometimes you have to break people down before you can build them up properly." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "And the Academy administration supports this approach to student orientation?" James's expression flickered slightly, the first sign of uncertainty he had shown. "The faculty understands that peer mentoring is an important part of military education. Leadership development requires challenging environments. As long as nobody gets seriously hurt, they generally let senior students handle newcomer integration." They had reached the edge of the training area, where a growing crowd of cadets was gathering. Sarah counted roughly 20 observers, their ages suggesting a mix of class years. Some appeared genuinely curious about her capabilities, while others clearly expected to witness another humiliation ritual. The obstacle course stretched before them in sections of increasing difficulty. The first portion included basic challenges: low walls to vault, tires to navigate, and balance beams to cross. The middle section featured rope climbs, cargo nets, and mud crawls that would test both strength and endurance. The final portion included high walls, rope traversals, and precision challenges that required technique as much as physical capability. Tyler gestured toward the starting line with theatrical flourish. "Ladies first. We'll time you on the full course and see how you compare to Academy standards. Don't worry about setting any records. We're just looking for a baseline to work with." Sarah studied the course with professional interest. She had encountered similar challenges countless times during her SEAL career, though usually under considerably more stressful conditions. Night operations, live fire exercises, and scenarios designed to simulate combat stress had made such training routine rather than intimidating. "What's the current record for completion?" she asked. Marcus consulted his phone. Official Academy record is 4 minutes and 37 seconds, set by a member of the varsity athletics team. Unofficial record belongs to Tyler here at 4 minutes and 18 seconds. Most newcomers are lucky to finish under 8 minutes without stopping. Tyler stretched ostentatiously, drawing attention to his athletic build. "I should mention that the course record was set during optimal conditions. Today's a bit muddy from yesterday's rain, so times will probably be slower than usual. Just do your best and try not to get discouraged." Sarah nodded and began removing her jacket, revealing the plain gray t-shirt she wore underneath. Several observers made comments about her slender build. clearly expecting her to struggle with the physical demands ahead. She ignored the commentary and began a brief stretching routine that suggested familiarity with athletic preparation. James positioned himself near the starting line with his phone ready to time her attempt. Remember, this isn't just about speed. We're looking at technique, endurance, mental toughness under pressure, the full package that makes someone effective in military service. Sarah completed her stretching and approached the starting line. The crowd had grown to nearly 30 cadets, and their energy suggested they were expecting entertainment rather than genuine assessment. She recognized the moment for what it was, a test that would determine her standing at the academy for the remainder of her time there. "Any particular rules I should be aware of?" she asked. Tyler's smile became predatory. "Standard military protocols apply. No shortcuts, no assistance, complete every obstacle properly or start over. Safety first, but don't expect special treatment because you're new here." Sarah nodded and took her position at the starting line. She had made a decision during the walk to the training area. These three cadets clearly derived their authority from intimidation and assumed superiority. The only way to establish appropriate boundaries was to demonstrate that their assumptions were fundamentally incorrect. "Ready when you are," she said calmly. James raised his phone. "On your mark. Get set. Go." Sarah exploded from the starting line with a burst of speed that immediately caught the observers off guard. She approached the first obstacle, a series of low barriers, and flowed over them with fluid efficiency that spoke of extensive practice. Her form was textbook perfect, her transitions smooth and economical. Marcus's confident expression began to falter as Sarah reached the tire section. Instead of the awkward stepping pattern most people used, she moved through the obstacles with a rhythm that suggested muscle memory rather than conscious thought. Her feet found the optimal placement automatically, her balance never wavering. "She's had some training," Tyler observed, his tone losing some of its casual arrogance. The balance beam section should have slowed her down. The narrow wooden structure required careful foot placement and mental focus that often caused newcomers to fall and restart. Sarah crossed it without hesitation, her movement suggesting someone accustomed to operating under pressure. James checked his phone and swore quietly. "She's already under 3 minutes and she hasn't even reached the hard stuff yet." The rope climb represented the first serious test of upper body strength. The thick hemp rope stretched 20 feet upward, requiring both technique and raw power to ascend quickly. Most cadets took at least 90 seconds to complete the climb, and many never managed it at all. Sarah approached the rope with the same calm efficiency she had shown throughout the course. She wrapped her legs properly, established a secure grip, and began ascending with smooth, powerful movements that ate up distance rapidly. Her breathing remained controlled, her technique flawless. "Jesus Christ," someone in the crowd muttered. "She's going up that thing like it's a ladder." Sarah reached the top of the rope, touched the required marker, and descended with controlled speed that demonstrated complete comfort with the apparatus. She landed lightly and continued toward the cargo net without pause. Tyler's face had gone pale. Where the hell did she learn to climb like that? The cargo net should have presented another challenge. The heavy rope structure required specific technique to navigate efficiently, and most people struggled with the coordination needed to move quickly while maintaining 3 points of contact. Sarah flowed up and over the obstacle as if it were solid ground, her movements economical and precise. Marcus checked his own watch and realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. "She's going to break the course record." "How is that possible?" The mud crawl section forced participants to low crawl beneath barbed wire through thick, sticky mud that clung to clothing and gear. It was designed to be miserable, testing mental toughness as much as physical capability. Sarah dropped to her belly and moved through the obstacle with mechanical efficiency, her elbows and knees driving her forward in a pattern that minimized contact with the wire above. James found himself holding his breath as Sarah emerged from the mud section and sprinted toward the final portion of the course. Her gray t-shirt was now completely brown with mud, but her pace had not slackened. If anything, she seemed to be accelerating. "This isn't possible," Tyler said quietly. "Nobody moves through that section that fast. Especially not a transfer student on her first attempt." The high wall represented the course's most intimidating obstacle, 12 feet of smooth wood that required a combination of technique, timing, and explosive power to overcome. Most cadets needed multiple attempts to clear it successfully, and many never managed it without assistance. Sarah approached the wall at a dead sprint, planted her left foot against the vertical surface, and drove upward with her right leg in a fluid motion that carried her high enough to grasp the top edge. She pulled herself up and over with upper body strength that left the observers stunned. "She just made that look easy," someone in the crowd said. "I've never seen anyone clear that wall in one try." The final section included a rope traverse that required cadets to cross a 20-foot gap using only their hands and arms. It was a strength and endurance test that defeated most people through simple attrition. Sarah clipped into the safety line and began moving across the rope with steady, rhythmic progress. Marcus realized his mouth was hanging open and closed it with visible effort. "This is impossible. She's moving like she's done this course 1,000 times before." Sarah reached the far platform, unclipped from the safety line, and sprinted toward the finish line. The crowd had fallen silent, their expectation of entertainment replaced by genuine amazement. As she crossed the final marker, James checked his phone in disbelief. 3 minutes and 48 seconds, he announced in a stunned voice. She just demolished the Academy record by almost 30 seconds. Sarah walked back toward the group, her breathing slightly elevated but far from labored. She accepted a towel from one of the observers and began cleaning mud from her arms and hands with casual efficiency. Her demeanor suggested someone who had completed a routine warm-up, rather than a challenging obstacle course. Tyler stared at her with an expression that mixed disbelief with dawning concern. "That's not possible. Nobody runs a course like that without extensive training. Specialized training. Where exactly did you say you went to college?" Sarah finished with the towel and handed it back with a polite nod of thanks. "I didn't mention college. You assumed I was a typical transfer student based on my appearance and gender. Sometimes assumptions can be misleading." Marcus struggled to process what he had just witnessed. "But you have to have training. That kind of performance doesn't happen by accident. What's your background?" Sarah glanced at her watch and realized she had 15 minutes to clean up before her appointment with Colonel Harrison. "As I mentioned earlier, I'd prefer to focus on my education rather than comparing resumes. Thank you for the orientation. It was informative." James blocked her path again, but his posture was different now. The casual confidence had been replaced by something closer to desperation. "Wait. You can't just walk away after a performance like that. We need to understand what we're dealing with here." Sarah's expression remained calm, but her voice carried a subtle edge that several observers recognized as significant. "What you're dealing with is another cadet who's here to complete her education. Nothing more, nothing less. I suggest you treat me accordingly." Tyler's calculating mind was working furiously, trying to reconcile what he had witnessed with his assumptions about who belonged at the Academy. "Look, if we made some incorrect assumptions, we can adjust. But you have to understand our position. We're responsible for maintaining standards here." Sarah studied the three of them with the same calm attention she had shown earlier, but now the observers could see something different in her posture. The casual dismissal she had shown their initial intimidation attempts was gone, replaced by focused evaluation of potential threats. "Your position," she said quietly, "seems to be based on the assumption that you have authority over other cadets. That you have the right to test and evaluate newcomers based on your personal standards. Is that an accurate assessment?" Marcus realized that the dynamic had shifted completely. Where earlier they had been in control of the situation, now they were being questioned by someone who clearly possessed capabilities they had not anticipated. "We're senior cadets," he said defensively. "It's our responsibility to help newcomers understand Academy expectations." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "And does the Academy administration specifically assign you this responsibility? Or is it something you've taken upon yourselves?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Several observers exchanged glances, clearly recognizing the implications of what she was asking. Tyler realized that their entire system of maintaining dominance was being challenged by someone who understood institutional authority better than they did. "The faculty expects senior students to provide mentorship," James said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah's smile was polite, but somehow unsettling. Mentorship. That's an interesting term for what I observed. From my perspective, it looked more like hazing designed to establish social dominance through intimidation and humiliation. The accusation was delivered with such calm precision that it hit like a physical blow. Marcus felt his face redden as he realized how their behavior must have appeared to someone with genuine military experience. Now wait a minute, Tyler started. But Sarah raised her hand in a gesture that somehow commanded immediate silence. I have an appointment to keep, she said. I'm sure we'll have opportunities to continue this conversation later. In the meantime, you might want to consider whether your current approach to newcomer orientation is consistent with the Academy's actual values and policies. She turned and walked away, leaving the three cadets standing in front of a crowd of observers who were now looking at them with expressions that ranged from curiosity to outright skepticism. The woman they had planned to humiliate had not only demonstrated physical capabilities that exceeded their own, but had also exposed the questionable nature of their authority in front of their peers. Marcus watched her go, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Who the hell is she? Colonel Harrison's office occupied a corner of the administration building with windows that overlooked both the parade ground and the obstacle course where Sarah had just completed her impromptu demonstration. The colonel himself was a compact man in his early 50s whose bearing suggested someone accustomed to making difficult decisions under pressure. His desk was organized with military precision, and the walls displayed commendations from 3 decades of distinguished service. Sarah knocked on the doorframe at exactly 1400 hours, having used the intervening time to clean up and change into a fresh uniform. Despite her recent exertion, she appeared completely composed as she stood at attention in the doorway. Cadet Chen reporting as ordered. Sir? Colonel Harrison looked up from a file folder that bore her name and gestured toward the chair across from his desk. Come in, Chen. Please, have a seat. I trust you found your way around campus without difficulty? Sarah settled into the indicated chair with the straight-backed posture that suggested long familiarity with formal military interactions. No difficulties, sir. The layout is quite logical. The colonel studied her with the practiced eye of someone who had evaluated thousands of military personnel over his career. Something in her bearing suggested experience that went beyond typical cadet training, but her file indicated she was a transfer student from civilian education. Let me start by saying we're pleased to have you at Fort Braxton. Transfer students often bring valuable perspectives that enhance our program. However, I want to make sure you understand what you're getting into here. This isn't a typical academic environment. Sarah nodded respectfully. I understand, sir. I'm prepared for the challenges ahead. Colonel Harrison opened her file and frowned slightly at what appeared to be significant redactions throughout the documentation. Your application materials are somewhat unusual, Chen. Most transfer students have extensive academic records, previous military training, or family connections that explain their interest in our program. Your background appears to be largely classified. Sarah's expression remained neutral. Yes, sir. I understand that creates some administrative complications. I was told that you would receive additional documentation through appropriate channels. Before the colonel could respond, his desk phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and his eyebrows rose slightly. Excuse me, Chen. I need to take this call. Colonel Harrison lifted the receiver. Colonel Harrison speaking. His expression grew progressively more serious as he listened to the caller. Yes, I understand. No, I hadn't been fully briefed. When did this information become available? Sarah sat quietly while the colonel continued his conversation, but she could see him occasionally glancing at her with growing interest. The call lasted several minutes, during which his demeanor shifted from professional curiosity to something approaching respect. Thank you for the clarification, Colonel Harrison said finally. Yes, I'll handle the situation appropriately. Understood. He hung up the phone and studied Sarah with completely different eyes. The polite interest of a moment before had been replaced by the focused attention of someone who had just learned something significant. That was Admiral Matthews at Naval Special Warfare Command. It seems your file contains some important details that weren't immediately apparent. Would you care to elaborate on your previous service experience? Sarah straightened slightly in her chair. 8 years with Naval Special Warfare, sir. 3 combat deployments, multiple classified operations. Medical separation following a training injury that precluded continued active duty with SEAL teams. Colonel Harrison leaned back in his chair as the implications sank in. You're a Navy SEAL, combat veteran, and you're here as a transfer student because the Navy offered me a choice between medical discharge and transition to officer training that would allow continued service in a different capacity. I chose to serve. The colonel nodded slowly, his understanding of the situation shifting completely. And you've been at the academy for how long? I arrived this morning, sir, approximately 2 hours ago. Colonel Harrison's desk phone rang again. This time his expression suggested he was expecting the call. Yes, I see. How many witnesses? And their reaction was, he listened for several moments before responding. Thank you for the report. I'll handle this personally. He hung up and fixed Sarah with a direct stare. It seems you've already had an encounter with some of our senior cadets. 3 of them, to be precise. Care to tell me about that? Sarah chose her words carefully. 3 cadets approached me when I arrived and offered to provide orientation regarding academy standards. They suggested I attempt the obstacle course to establish a baseline for my capabilities. And the result of that attempt? I completed the course, sir. Colonel Harrison consulted another file on his desk. According to the report I just received, you broke the academy record by 29 seconds on your first attempt. Is that accurate? If that's what the timing indicated, sir. The colonel stood and walked to his window, where he could see cadets still gathered near the obstacle course, clearly engaged in animated discussion. Chen, we have a situation here that requires careful handling. Fort Braxton has an excellent reputation for producing quality officers, but we also have an ongoing problem with certain senior cadets who've taken it upon themselves to serve as unofficial gatekeepers for new arrivals. Sarah remained silent, recognizing that the colonel was working towards something specific. These 3 cadets, Thompson, Rodriguez, and Brooks, come from influential military families. They've maintained high academic standards and demonstrated leadership capabilities in formal settings. However, their approach to newcomer integration has been increasingly problematic. Colonel Harrison returned to his desk and fixed Sarah with a direct stare. What they don't realize is that their little hazing rituals have been carefully documented by Academy administration. We've been looking for an appropriate opportunity to address the situation. Sarah began to understand where the conversation was heading. How can I assist, sir? Your performance today has created a unique situation. These 3 have built their authority on the assumption that they represent the peak of cadet capability. You've just demonstrated that assumption is incorrect, and you've done so in front of witnesses. The colonel opened another folder. What I need to know is whether you're willing to take on a special assignment that would help us address this disciplinary problem while completing your own education. Sarah considered the proposal carefully. What kind of assignment, sir? Official designation as a peer mentor for incoming transfer students. Unofficial responsibility for demonstrating that talent and capability can come from unexpected sources. The 3 cadets you encountered today need to learn some important lessons about respect, assumptions, and genuine leadership. Sarah nodded slowly. I understand, sir. You want me to serve as an example that challenges their current worldview. More than that, I want you to help them grow into the kind of officers this country actually needs. Right now, they're headed toward positions of authority with attitudes that could prove dangerous to the people under their command. The colonel stood and walked around his desk to face Sarah directly. This won't be easy. They'll push back, probably try to undermine your credibility, maybe even attempt to discover details about your background that you'd prefer to keep private. Sarah's expression remained calm. I've dealt with hostile environments before, sir. I can handle whatever they might attempt. I'm sure you can. But the goal isn't to defeat them. It's to help them become better officers. That requires a different kind of skill set than what you used in military operations. Colonel Harrison returned to his chair and consulted his calendar. Starting tomorrow, you'll be integrated into their advanced leadership training courses. You'll also participate in all physical training activities, tactical exercises, and academic challenges alongside the senior class. Sarah raised an eyebrow. That's an accelerated timeline, sir. Most transfer students require several months of preparatory coursework. Most transfer students don't have 8 years of operational military experience. Based on your record, you're already qualified for most of what we teach here. The question is whether you can learn to teach others. The colonel handed her a sealed packet. Your course schedule, dormitory assignment, and additional materials. You'll be housed in the senior class section, which will put you in regular contact with Thompson's group. I trust you'll handle any interactions appropriately. Sarah accepted the packet and stood at attention. Understood, sir. Is there anything specific I should know about Academy policies regarding conflict resolution? Colonel Harrison smiled for the first time during their meeting. Standard military protocol applies. Document everything, involve appropriate authorities when necessary, and remember that your goal is to develop future officers, not to punish past mistakes. As Sarah reached the door, the colonel called her name. Chen, one more thing. These 3 aren't bad people, just misguided ones. They have the potential to become excellent officers if someone can help them understand what genuine leadership actually looks like. Sarah nodded and left the office, making her way toward the dormitory complex with a clear understanding of her mission. The packet Colonel Harrison had given her contained more than just academic schedules. It included detailed profiles of the 3 cadets she had encountered, their family backgrounds, academic records, and documented incidents involving other students. Marcus Thompson came from a family of Air Force generals, had maintained a 3.7 GPA throughout his time at the academy, and showed genuine leadership potential in formal exercises. However, his file also contained multiple complaints from other students about intimidation tactics and inappropriate use of family connections to avoid consequences. James Rodriguez had excelled in tactical training and demonstrated real skill in crisis management scenarios. His father's Navy career had provided him with extensive knowledge of military protocol and tradition. The problem was his apparent belief that birthright trumped merit when it came to leadership opportunities. Tyler Brooks was perhaps the most complex of the 3. His academic record was flawless, his strategic thinking abilities were exceptional, and his understanding of military psychology was sophisticated. Unfortunately, he had used those capabilities primarily to manipulate social dynamics for personal advantage, rather than for constructive purposes. Sarah reached her assigned dormitory room and began unpacking her minimal belongings. The space was spartanly furnished but comfortable, with a window that overlooked the main courtyard where her first encounter with the 3 cadets had taken place. As she organized her gear, she reflected on the unusual situation she had found herself in. Throughout her SEAL career, she had operated in environments where the mission parameters were clearly defined and success could be measured in objective terms. This assignment was different. Success would be measured by the personal growth of 3 young men who currently saw her as a threat to their established order. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Sarah opened it to find a young woman in cadet uniform, probably a sophomore based on her insignia. "Excuse me, are you Sarah Chen, the new transfer student?" Sarah nodded. "That's right." The young woman's face lit up with obvious relief. "I'm Rebecca Martinez. I heard about what happened at the obstacle course today. I just wanted to say thank you." Sarah invited her in, curious about the unexpected visit. "Thank you for what?" Rebecca settled into the room's single chair with visible nervousness. "For standing up to Thompson and his friends. Most of us have just learned to avoid them. But that means they keep getting away with treating people however they want." Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, recognizing an opportunity to gather intelligence about the situation she was walking into. "How long has this been going on?" "Since they became senior cadets, maybe longer. They've created this whole system where they decide who belongs here and who doesn't. Anyone who challenges them gets targeted until they either submit or transfer out." Rebecca's expression grew more serious. "They drove out 2 transfer students last semester. Both of them were good people who would have made excellent officers, but Thompson's group made their lives miserable until they couldn't take it anymore." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "And the faculty allows this?" "The faculty sees what Thompson's group wants them to see. Perfect academic records, excellent performance in formal exercises, glowing recommendations from family connections. Unless someone files an official complaint, The administration assumes everything is fine. Rebecca leaned forward conspiratorially. But nobody files complaints because these three have connections that could destroy your military career before it starts. Thompson's grandfather is a retired general who still has influence in personnel decisions. Rodriguez's father sits on promotion boards. Brooks has family connections throughout the Pentagon. Sarah began to understand the complexity of the situation Colonel Harrison was asking her to address. These three cadets had created a system of intimidation that was protected by institutional power and family influence. "What happened after I left today?" Sarah asked. Rebecca's smile returned. "They tried to minimize what you accomplished, claimed the course conditions were unusually favorable, suggested you must have had prior knowledge of the obstacles. But everyone who watched knows what they saw. You made them look foolish." Sarah considered the information carefully. "How do you think they'll respond?" "They'll try to find something they can use against you. Personal information, academic weaknesses, anything that lets them regain the upper hand. Thompson especially doesn't handle challenges to his authority well." A commotion in the hallway interrupted their conversation. Through the open door, they could see Marcus Thompson striding down the corridor with James and Tyler flanking him like bodyguards. His expression was thunderous, and his voice carried clearly as he spoke to his companions. "I don't care what kind of training she's had. Nobody makes me look like an idiot in front of half the academy without consequences. We're going to find out exactly who she is and where she came from." Tyler's voice was calmer but equally determined. "I've already made some calls. My contact at Personnel Records is looking into her background. Whatever she's hiding, we'll discover it." James nodded agreement. "And once we know what we're dealing with, we can plan an appropriate response. Nobody gets to humiliate us and just walk away." They passed Sarah's door without noticing it was open, continuing their discussion as they headed toward the common area. Rebecca watched them go with obvious concern. "See what I mean? They're not going to let this go. You've challenged something fundamental about how they see themselves." Sarah stood and walked to her window, looking out at the academy grounds where other cadets were going about their evening routines. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she felt the familiar confidence that came from having a clear mission and the capabilities to accomplish it. "Let them investigate," she said quietly. "Sometimes the truth is the most powerful weapon available." Rebecca studied her with obvious admiration. "You're not afraid of them at all, are you?" Sarah turned back to face her new friend with a slight smile. "Fear is useful when it's based on realistic assessment of actual threats. But intimidation only works when the target doesn't understand their own capabilities." As evening settled over Fort Braxton Academy, Sarah Chen prepared for what she knew would be an interesting few months. Three cadets who were accustomed to unopposed authority were about to discover that their assumptions about power, respect, and leadership were fundamentally flawed. The education they received would determine not only their own futures, but the safety of everyone they would someday command. Tomorrow's classes would mark the beginning of a very different kind of military training than any of them had experienced before.